Good morning, everybody. Let me begin with a simple question. When we buy a shirt or a trouser, a dress, or any garment, most of us think about the design, price, and the comfort, or maybe most of the time brand. But very rarely do we think about what happened behind the scene before that garment reaches us. Behind every finished garment, there is a fabric cutting, coloring, washing, and various factors that involve it. Sometimes a large amount of waste, sometimes fabric pieces are left unused, sometimes the garments are rejected, and even sometimes it never reaches the customer. Now, this is not only a factory problem. Most of the time we take it as a factory problem, but it's not. It is connected to the environment, business cost, worker welfare, export competitiveness, and even Sri Lanka's reputation in the global market. Sri Lanka's apparel industry has already earned a strong name internationally for quality and ethical manufacturing. But today, global buyers are asking for more than that. They are asking whether our products are sustainable, whether the waste is reduced, whether water and energy are being used and managed properly, and whether companies can prove their environmental and social responsibility. So this brings us to the main focus of our presentation today, which is sustainability challenges and pathways in Sri Lanka's apparel industry. In simple terms, our presentation is about how Sri Lanka's apparel industry can move away from the old model make, use and throw away, and more towards a better model where materials are used, waste is reduced, and long-term value is created. So today, we will discuss how Sri Lanka can build a greener tomorrow by balancing environmental and social economic needs. Before going into the topic, let me briefly introduce our team and flow of today's presentation. Our group consists of Mohammad Siraj, myself, Saman Jayasekara, Dilini Vijayasundara, Nirupa Paldano, Ruan Fonseca, and Nipuna Virakoli. Each member will cover a specific part of the presentation so that we can explain the issue step by step. I will begin with the introduction and the problem definition, where I explain why textile waste has become an importantly sustainable issue of Sri Lanka's apparel industry. After that, Ruan will discuss the industry context and its relevance, especially the importance of apparel exports and Sri Lanka's economy and our global question. Then Nirupa will explain the root cause and the drivers behind the textile waste and sustainability project. Next, Dilini will take about the current practices, gaps and benchmarking, showing what is already happening in the industry and where improvements are still needed. After that, Saman will present the proposed solution, especially what can be done and how it can be implemented. Finally, Nipuna will explain the impact, value creation, and the conclusion, showing how sustainability can create a long-term business value. So the flow is very simple. First, we understand the problem, then we identify the causes, then we look at the current gaps. Finally, we discuss the solution and the expected benefits. Now let us come to the main issue. Sri Lanka's apparel industry is one of the country's most important industries. It contributes over $5 billion annually. And it has more than 300 garment factories, where 350,000 employment opportunities are being given. 80% of those crowd are women. So this industry is not only for exports, it's also important for employment, family income, and women welfare and women participation in the economy as well. But behind the success story of this, there is a lot of issues or maybe a serious sustainable challenge. Every year, apparel sector itself generates a significant amount of textile waste. This can come from fabric cutting, rejected garment, excess to various ways. But some of this waste is reused or maybe recycled, but still a large amount of the waste are being end up in landfills or maybe disposed in harmful waste.
Thank you, Siraj. Let me give you a quick picture of this industry. We export over $5 billion every year. That is around 6% of our national gross domestic product from just one sector. Sri Lanka's single largest exporter. And behind those numbers are 350,000 people directly employed. When you add indirect jobs, transport, logistic, suppliers, over a million livelihoods depend on this industry. And 80% of those workers are women. So this is not just an economic story. It's a deeply social one too. We supply brands like Intimissimi, Tessenis, Nike, Gap, and Victoria's Secret. Premium global brands. Brands that care deeply about how their products are made. And we didn't just compete on price. We built a reputation, garments without guilt. No child labor, no sweatshops, fair wages, and safe conditions. When you source from Sri Lanka, you don't have to feel guilty about how your clothes are made. And the good news, we are already practicing sustainable development goals, specifically Goal 5, 8, 12, and 13. Gender equity, decent work, responsible consumption, and climate action, not as targets, as daily practice. But the pressure is growing. Buyers today don't just ask, are your workers treated fairly? They ask, what is your carbon footprint? How do you manage water? Where does your waste go? Now let me show you what does good actually look like right here in Sri Lanka. Starting with energy. Benji Limited has covered the entire factory roof with solar panels, 22,500 square meters. That is same as 3 football fields, all generating clean energy. And they are not alone. Brandix and Mars made the same kind of investment across their facilities. On water, treated water is reused for irrigation, not discharge, reused. On waste, non-recyclable materials goes to cement for co-processing, converted to ash, not to landfill. On workers, all 5 Universe factories including Benji runs with full air condition, humidity control, clean, safe, comfortable work environment. The solution exists. They are working. The challenge is spreading them across the whole industry. Over to you, Nirupa.
Thanks, Juan, for that insights. Now let's look at why the garment industry is facing such a sustainability crisis. In Sri Lanka, we are mostly stuck in take, make, dispose model. If you put it simply, what gets made gets wasted. As you can see in the slides, these failures hit us in 3 ways. First, environment. Globally, fashion causes 10% carbon emission. Here at home, our land is filled with textile that releases methane. And the toxic dyes are polluting our soil and water. Second, the economic loss. This is a massive missed opportunity. Every year, we lose over $500 billion US. That's because 1% of the clothing is actually recycled into new clothes. We are literally throwing money away. Finally, the social impact. When this textile waste is burned informally, it is the low-income workers and the neighbors who suffer from breathing issues. According to records, 92 million tons of waste is produced every year. Moving away from this old model isn't just a green goal, it's a business necessity. So, what is stopping us? This slide shows us 6 root causes that holds us back. We can categorize this into 2. One is inside the factory, other is across the supply chain. Inside the factory, our production uses too many resources, creates too much of scrap fabric, and we don't have a good system to recycle this fabric back into the loop. Across the supply chain, we face huge pressure from international buyers to keep the cost low, which makes it hard to invest in sustainability. On top of that, we lack the data tools to actually track the impact. Basically, the system is designed for speed, low cost, not for lasting value. So despite these challenges, 3 big forces are pushing the industry to change. Number 1, money. Everything, electricity, water, fabric is getting expensive day by day. To protect their profits, factories have to cut down on waste. Efficiency is now the only way to survive. Number 2 is rules. Europe is bringing very strict laws about pollution and supply chain ethics. So it's a bit confusing right now because different buyers want different things. But the message is very clear. Follow the rules, follows the business. Number 3, technology and people. Solar power, waste tech are finally affordable. At the same time, the shoppers are found to be vocal. They expect the clothes they wear to be made fair and not to hurt the planet or the people who make them. In short, rising costs, tougher rules, and pressure from the customers are forcing to evolve. On that note, I'll hand it over to Dilini, who will walk us through the current practices and the gaps still need to be filled.
Now, I will briefly discuss the current sustainability practices within the Sri Lankan apparel industry and identify the major gaps that still exist. Sri Lanka has positioned itself as one of the more sustainable apparel manufacturing destinations in South Asia. Leading companies such as MS Holdings and Brandix have invested significantly in environmentally responsible operations. Many factories are now LEED certified green buildings, focusing on areas such as energy efficiency, water conversion, and sustainable material and indoor environmental quality. In addition, several companies have introduced the renewable energy initiatives, including solar power and biomass energy systems. Sri Lanka has also built a strong reputation for ethical manufacturing through the Garment Without Guilt concept, which promotes fair labor practices and responsible sourcing. So these examples clearly show that sustainability is achievable within the Sri Lankan apparel sector and can be used more as a competitive advantage in the global market. The current practice and gaps. Although there has been good progress, there are still important gaps within the industry. The one major challenge is that sustainability adoption is uneven. Large organizations are moving ahead rapidly, but many small and medium-sized factories still struggle due to the limited resources and the technical expertise. Another issue is weak circularity. Fabric recycling and reuse practices are still limited, and waste management systems are also consistently implemented across the sector. Where compared with other countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam, Sri Lanka performed well in ethical branding and quality standards, but those countries are scaling sustainability initiatives more aggressively across the entire industry. Therefore, Sri Lanka must move beyond isolated success stories and ensure sustainability practices are adopted more widely throughout the supply chain. The slide summarizes the key benchmarking insights and areas for improvement. Overall, Sri Lanka's opportunity is to compete not only the cost, but on verified sustainability performance. Strengthening ESG practices across the entire sector can help the country maintain a strong position in the global apparel market. In conclusion, Sri Lanka already has a strong sustainability foundation, but future success will depend on expanding these practices across the wider industry and improving consistency, transparency, and innovation.
So far, we have seen the current Sri Lanka apparel industry realities through strengths and gaps. So now we want to look at it in a different perspective, more of the solution perspective. Actually, we have seen a business as usual may not good enough, and we want to look at, while looking at the competition, companies need to look at the sustainability aspect. So here I have a small question to raise. How do we move forward sustainably while keeping the competition? So to answer that question, we look at a couple of points there. So the more than the intentions, we want to have a structured action. So how we can go about the structured action through SDG 12, responsible use of energy, water and raw materials. So then again, we can look at the ESG aspects. So under environment, we can look at carbon impact. Under social impact, we can look at labor standards and the more people orientation. And the governance side of it, we can look at transparency and compliance. The last point over there is the circular economy principles. Here, we have to shift from take, make, dispose to RRR, that is the reuse, recycle and reduce waste. So looking at that framework aspect, I want to move to the turning strategy into action side of it. So there, we are looking at 4 points as listed over there. So the number one is the renewable energy. This is where solar and biomass coming into the picture. So we have the less emission and the efficient cost management under renewable energy category. And then come to the most important one is the water management. And there are recycling systems, zero liquid discharge, and the meat scarcity and buyer expectations coming under water management. So moving to circular economy, circular supply chain there, and there are fabric recycling, closed loop systems and waste management coming into the picture. So finally, we looked at the people and productivity where training and retention is important and the skilled workforce to have a sustainable growth. Out of our discussion now, we have few key takeaways. The very first takeaway is that integration is critical. We can't play isolated initiatives here, and we have to have integrated systems where sustainability is coming into the picture. And secondly, Sri Lanka has a strength, but scalability. We have to scale that to compare globally. So that also coming into the picture. And finally, sustainability is equal to is a balancing act. This is where the 3 P's coming into the picture: people, planet and profitability. If you look at the one angle over there, we'll say profitability, or probably you can't compromise the other 2 factors there.
Alright, now we're going to talk about the circular economy solutions. So Sri Lankan apparel industry must move from its current state, which is we call the linear model, to take, make and dispose, to a more circular economic model, which we call the circular apparel export model. So in discussing that, first of all, we need to understand what the circular economy is. So the circular economy is elimination of waste and pollution and then keeping materials in use as well as regenerating the nation. So these are the different steps of circular economy. So here we are discussing about 4 different solutions in terms of what we can do for the apparel industry. The first solution is recycling and upcycling. So this means convert fabric offcuts, rejected garments and unsold stocks into things like recycled fabrics, accessories, industrial materials and new value-added products. Second solution we call zero waste designs. So with that we do reducing waste before production begins as well as using better pattern cutting, digital design and efficient fabric painting. And this also can reduce fabric offcuts and improve resource efficiency. Right. The third solution is extending producer responsibility. So manufacturers and brands should take responsibility for the full product life cycle. And this includes taking back, reusing, repairing, recycling and eco-labeling of products. And then this also is important because places like European Union textile policy is moving towards durability, repairability, recyclability and producer responsibility. So the fourth solution is industrial symbiosis. What it means is that one factory's waste becomes another factory's raw material. And this creates connected circular supply chain, which is the expected impact can be explained through the triple bottom line principle, the environmental value, the social value and the economic value. So first talking about environmental impact, so less textile waste going to landfill and lower carbon intensity and better water and chemical management, reduce pressure on natural resources are points that we're talking about here. And then talking about social impact, the workers gain new skills in waste segregation, recycling standards, digital tracking, sustainable production are important factors. So this ultimately supports safe operations and protects livelihoods and economic impact. So as a country, so we have lower waste disposal costs, lower utility costs, better bioretention, as well as stronger sustainability positioning. We're talking about the country Sri Lanka can compete through quality, ethics, innovation, and verified sustainability in the market, not only the low cost. Then we move on to the trade-offs to manage the constraints. So upfront investment cost is obviously a trade-off, and then the training time, data burden for SMEs, need for reliable recycling partners is again a challenge. Possible short-term production for delivery disruptions is also a challenge. So what we can recommend, the final recommendation includes adopting a sector-wide circular apparel export model as we discussed. To start with an anchor pilot such as a leading exporter, then we can scale through strategies like supplier scorecards. Next, we are going to talk about long-term values from 4 different areas. The first one is the global ESG framework integration. And then we talk about attracting green investors. And then we talk about building resilient supply chains. And then we talk about enduring business values. First, let's talk about global ESG framework integration. So the international buyers increasingly require a proofs of emission reductions, labor standards, waste control, traceability, transparent governance to make sure the global ESG framework integrations are in place. And then we're talking about IFRS S2, which also requires the disclosure of climate-related risks, opportunities, governance, strategy, metrics, and targets. And then we move on to attracting green investors. So companies with credible ESG performances can access to green finance, sustainability-linked loans, as well as investor confidence can be gained. So these are very important in gaining investments. And long-term cost of capital can be reduced with lower environmental risks. And then we move on to building resilient supply chains. So building resilient supply chains involves circular material recovery, which can reduce the dependence on virgin raw materials. And then the better ESG data protects relationships with regions like the European Union, the UK, and US buyers, which are very critical in the operation. Talking about building resilient supply chains, the circular material recovery can be reduced depending on virgin raw materials. Better ESG data can protect relationships with regions like European Union and countries like US and the UK, the buyers there. And obviously, during business value, the sustainability measures improves cost efficiency, buyer loyalty, brand reputation, as well as export competitiveness. So, in summary, Sri Lanka already has very strong reputation for garments without guilt. Garments without guilt. The next step is to become known for garment without waste. This is our vision. And if Sri Lanka combines circular economic practices, ESG reporting, worker training, and buyer partnerships, the apparel industry can become a global model for sustainability. Thank you very much for bearing with us today. So we are trying to build a greener tomorrow in the industry that we are in with being collaborative, innovative, and having very strong commitment to what we do. Thank you very much.